We have a lot to talk about on this Monday evening. Welcome back to Weather for Weather Geeks, everyone. Hope you had a good weekend. We're going to do a quick review of the kind of somewhat surprising weekend weather, and we'll talk about all the systems that are coming our way in the coming days, and the next couple of weeks look to be rocking, and we've got some changes in the ideas for the medium and longer range as well, which we'll talk about in this video. But let's first review, actually, it's kind of a forecast bust Sunday afternoon in our northern areas. Now, the weather cooperated as expected in kind of our central areas and southern areas, Mahoning County, Columbiana County, but in Trumbull and Mercer, we had accumulating snow Sunday afternoon. This warm front that pushed through, there's an old weather axiom, never trust a warm front, because sometimes warm fronts just want to provide some surprises, and it not only provided some liquid precipitation in parts of our area, but it was just cold enough for some wet snow in a lot of Trumbull and Mercer counties, even up to an inch or so. At the airport, we recorded 0.8. It got pretty hairy on the roads for a time Sunday afternoon. In the weather forecasting business, when it comes to predicting the future, this sort of thing happens. We try to minimize it, but every now and then the atmosphere is just going to fool us a little bit. And so that was a situation on Sunday in which that little system definitely overachieved a little bit. And so with that 0.8 at the airport to kick off the month of February, that brings us to 32.5 for the season. Now that's still over 8 inches behind average. We are running a decent deficit. Now, of course, it's not as much of a deficit as we've run over the last couple of winters, but it's still notable that we're almost to the double digits in our snowfall deficit at the Youngstown Warren Airport so far this season. But on Saturday, it was February the 1st. We're now into the final month of meteorological or climatological winter, December, January, and February. We're past the darkest, coldest time of the year, climatologically speaking. Our average high goes from the mid-30s to the lower 40s here in February. We're, of course, gaining well over 2 minutes of daylight per day right now as well. And, as I've been talking about frequently on Weather for Weather Geeks and on my social media outlets as well, and even on our newscasts, it's a real roller coaster ride this week. I think we're going to turn more consistently cold next week. But in the meantime, we made it to the mid-50s. Today was our warmest day in about 5 weeks. The next 2 days, colder, then warmer again, much warmer again on Thursday. And after that, we turn colder on Friday, a little warmer Saturday, despite some wintry precipitation heading our way during the course of the upcoming weekend. Then next week, it looks like the cold air settles in for a little while. This may be followed by a warm-up beyond this 10-day period, closer to maybe the 18th, 19th, 20th, something like that. But, the longer range is looking a little bit colder. The medium range, I should say, is looking a little bit colder than a lot of the information had last week. So I think the middle of the month is going to be a pretty cold period. Not as cold as, the middle of January was, but still notably cold weather, it looks like, for a handful of days at least during the middle of February. In the meantime, we have a cold front off to our north this evening. It's producing some snow in Toronto and over towards Syracuse, Watertown, New York, Burlington, Vermont, places like that. Pretty easy to find where this front is when you look at the temperature map. It got into the upper 60s to around 70 in Cincinnati today. Again, we made it into the mid-50s. We're still south of the cold front, but just off to the north, Detroit's down to 33, Buffalo's 34, and that's the air mass that, of course, is coming our way. And this might actually produce a sprinkle or a shower tonight before we drop below freezing in most spots. So I'm not real concerned about slick surfaces overnight, but there might be a little precipitation when it's 35 degrees late this evening towards about midnight, 1 a.m., and then we end up in the 20s later on for tonight. Now, in anticipation of our midweek system, which will bring a significant freezing rain threat to parts of the region, already the Pittsburgh National Weather Service office hoisted winter storm watches for their higher terrain counties south and east of Pittsburgh, out towards the Laurel Highlands, Johnstown, Pennsylvania, Indiana, Pennsylvania, up towards Du Bois, Clearfield, places like that. And, I suspect the Cleveland and Pittsburgh offices are going to be issuing a lot of winter weather advisories for a lot of their counties with the freezing rain threat materializing late on Wednesday. So let's talk about the next few days. An uneventful day on Tuesday, just colder, of course, clouds and some midday sunshine. And as we go into the day Wednesday, this is kind of a tricky forecast during the daylight hours. Some of the modeling is trying to spin up, I should say, a little band of light snow somewhere across, the area I just circled, somewhere in that zone. And if that were to occur, some of the modeling even indicates, hey, we could see a fresh half an inch to an inch of snow in some sort of skinny band that sets up on Wednesday. But the confidence on that idea is low. Not all the modeling has it, certainly. but those models who do have it suggest, hey, we could see a little small accumulation during the daylight hours on Wednesday. That would be well in advance of the more impactful part and the higher confidence part of this whole midweek forecast. That is Wednesday night. And, this is going to come in mostly as rain. The problem is it's going to be below freezing when it comes in. So I think by about midnight, give or take an hour or two on either side of midnight, Wednesday night, into early Thursday morning, we're going to see freezing rain. That's the purple color. And just a reminder of the difference between sleet and freezing rain. Sleet's more like dipping dots. Sleet pellets bounce off of things. Sleet can actually accumulate, and we prefer sleet to freezing rain, actually. Freezing rain is ice. It's liquid precipitation that freezes on contact. And despite the warm day today, overall, because we're coming out of a very cold period in January, the ground is pretty cold. The air temperature when this rain pushes in on average will be around 29 to 30. And so, yeah, there could certainly be some impacts from this for a handful of hours overnight. Now, by the time most people are up and about Thursday morning, 5, 6, 7 a.m., I think our temperature will have risen above the 32 mark, with the exception perhaps at daybreak on Thursday of areas east of I-79. So anyone traveling into interior Pennsylvania early in the day Thursday, along I-80 and along the PA Turnpike across southern PA, you're still going to run into some issues during the daylight hours on Thursday. But in our television viewing area, I think we're above freezing probably by daybreak on Thursday, and it's liquid precipitation for a chunk of the morning hours, but then we dry things out probably by Thursday afternoon. So how much freezing rain are we talking about here? Well, there's one model, the European, which just goes crazy here, and we're going to discount that. We think it's definitely an outlier. Most of our modeling is down here with the ice accretion numbers, close to 1/10 of an inch, something like that. Well, what does that mean? 1/10 of an inch worth of ice. And, it's not even a guarantee that we see that much, but the odds are decent locally that we get up to about 1/10 of an inch. Odds are a little higher both west and east of our area of exceeding that amount. When you talk about a 1/10 of an inch of ice accretion, usually that's not anything crippling. It's not going to cause widespread power outages. It's not going to weigh down tree limbs and power lines enough to cause a lot of problems, but certainly some surfaces can be slick. Colder surfaces like your windshield and your sidewalk, and elevated surfaces like bridges can certainly be slippery, and even the non-elevated surfaces that aren't treated. Again, the ground is cold, so even those regular surfaces, regular residential streets and even major highways could be slick if they're not treated before this freezing rain pushes in late Wednesday evening into the overnight. Now, this is the first of three kind of major-ish winter events that I'm keeping an eye on for the next 10 days. Our Wednesday night system, which I just talked about. The next one is Saturday. The timing on this is still up in the air a little bit. It's going to be at some point Saturday. Some of the modeling brings in precipitation before noon. Some of the modeling waits until later in the afternoon into the evening. But either way, when precipitation pushes in, it's probably going to be in the form of some sort of wintry mix. Sleet pellets. If we're still below freezing, which we probably will be for a time, some freezing rain could be a possibility. Might see some snowflakes as well. It probably changes to rain at some point, but it may take until later in the evening, Saturday evening. It'll be a situation kind of like Wednesday night where temperatures will rise enough that that'll cut off the major problems overnight Saturday night once we get above the freezing mark. The next one, and of course 10 days out, the details are not real clear on this, but I think the one middle of next week, about 10 days from right now, has a better chance of being a snow event rather than some sort of mixed precipitation event. So that's what we're going to be keeping an eye on this week and early next week, a potential midweek system middle of next week. Now let's talk about the longer range. Now, if you're kind of plugged into weather Twitter or online weather forums, if you are pretty in tune with what the weather geeks out there are chatting about, you may already have seen some of the chatter about what's going on in the stratosphere over the next couple of weeks, and I'm going to touch on that. But first I wanted to touch on a little bit some of the medium range trends, independent of what's going on in the stratosphere with a splitting of the polar vortex and things like that. Independent of that, in the medium term, so middle of February, it's looking colder on some of the data. For instance, here's the European extended model for right around Valentine's Day. This is the 13th into the 14th. Now, what we don't have is some sort of big ridge along the west coast, but we do have a big ridge up into Alaska. That's going to allow cross-polar flow to feed a lot of cold air down into the lower 48. Now, we do have this ridge off the southeast, which is going to resist some of the cold for a while. But I think as far west as we are, the cold's going to win more battles as we go into mid-month. This ridge is going to be far enough to the east that it's going to protect Florida and a lot of the East Coast from the worst of the cold, but I think around here we're going to be susceptible to a pretty cold period, I think, for the middle of the month. We don't have a big ridge on the West Coast like we a lot of times see when we get cold around here, but this strong of a ridge up into Alaska, that's going to promote, some really cold air to, it's going to allow it to come south with a fair amount of frequency during mid-month. Now, beyond that, what's going to happen later in February and even into March will probably depend some on what's going on high above us in the stratosphere, up near the top of the atmosphere, almost into outer space. What we're looking at is, a projection looking down on the North Pole here. Here's the polar vortex, currently really strong, looks like a donut over the North Pole, but it is expected to, get punched in the mouth a little bit here as we head towards mid-month. And what I mean by that is we'll get some warming in the stratosphere, nudging up against this vortex and perhaps splitting it in two, or at least at the very least stretching it some. What that may do is open the door to cold air across the United States during the second half of February and even into early spring. If this were to come to fruition, and even if it does come to fruition, it's no guarantee that there will be significant impacts here locally. A lot of times when you have a polar vortex disruption, the biggest disruptions down here where human beings are, not almost in outer space, the biggest disruptions happen over the ocean or on the other side of the world. So the confidence is low, but it's possible anyway that a disturbed polar vortex late in winter and early in spring could, frustrate us if we're longing for some warm weather and an early spring around here. So that's another thing we'll be keeping a close eye on here in the month of February. Long video tonight. Thanks for hanging with us. Lots to talk about in the next couple of weeks, and this is your place to go for the most details on our local weather in Eastern Ohio and Western PA. Have a great rest of your night. I'll see you back here on Tuesday.